Hi, I'm Christian, and today I'm going to teach you how to do the QuickSort, one of the many sorting methods available for the C++ language. So as you can see here, we have a properly kerfuffled array of numbers, and we need this sorted. And we're going to do that using the QuickSort method. First, we must pick a pivot. Usually you pick the centermost element. That would be 4 here, maybe. I'm not too great at maths. And then we swap it with the first element in the list. Then that becomes index. So that becomes our small index. This is still our pivot. That becomes our small index. And we increment index. And we ask, is 5 less than 4? It's not, so we increment index. Is 1 less than 4? Yes. So we move this forward and we swap them. And we increment index and say, is 3 less than 4? It is, so we move this forward, swap them. Index is 2 less than 4? It is, so we move this and swap them. Is 6 less than 4? It is not. Is 7 less than 4? It is not. And 8 less than 4? It is not. So now that we have the entire list gone through, we swap pivot and small index. And we now know that this element is exactly where it needs to be. So we partition that off. We are now left with 2 lists, a left list and a right list. Let's do the right list first. First, we pick a pivot point, and we swap it to the front of the list. Then we have, we increment index, and we have a small index. We ask, is 2 less than 1? It's not. Is 3 less than 1? It's not. So we've reached the end of the index. We swap pivot and small index, which 1 swaps with itself. And we now know that number 1 is in the right position, which is the first element in the list, as it should be. So we move that up. And we, again, have 2 lists. Let's do the leftmost right stage, this list. Let's do this list first. There's no real center point here, so we're going to have to pick a pivot. Let's do the first element in the list for the pivot. And then our small index is here, increment index, and we ask, is 3 less than 2? Well, it's really not. So we reach the end of the list, which means we swap pivot with small index, and we know that this is in the correct position. Now, we still have 2 lists, but this list has only 1 element, and a list with 1 element cannot be out of order, so we know that this is in the right spot as well. Now, we have this list. We can pick a pivot point. Let's pick 6, and we swap it at the beginning of the list. This is our pivot. This is our small index. And this, we increment index, and we say is 5 less than 6. It is. So we increment small index, and we swap it. How it swaps with itself. Increment index is 7 less than 6. It is not. And is 8 less than 6. It is not. So we flip here. We flip the pivot and the small index. And now we know that this is exactly where it needs to go. So that's up there. And we are left with this list. Let's pick a pivot, center point again, swap it with the beginning of the list. This becomes our this is still our pivot, this becomes our small index, and this is our index, is 6 less than 7. It is, increment small index, swap it with itself, and increment index is 8 less than 7. Well, it's not. Now we flip pivot and small index, and we know that this is exactly where it's supposed to be. We're now left with this list. We pick the first element as our pivot. That is also our small index. We increment index is 8 less than 7. It is really not. So we've reached the end of the list. We swap pivot and small index. We swap 7 with itself. We know this is in the right place. Now we are left with a final list of only 1 number. So we move that. And now we have a fully sorted list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorted. I'll leave you with a little bit of advice here. When you're asked to make a video about QuickSort, make sure you get a partner, and you don't turn away those that ask to be your partner because you think you can do it all on your own. And then maybe you'll avoid having to MacGyver a way to stick your phone to the ceiling so you can film yourself.